Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely fascinating. We're going to break down the complex, well-oiled machine that is the Indian Parliament. If you've ever found yourself wondering how the gears of the world's largest democracy actually turn on a day-to-day basis, well, you're in exactly the right place. Let's get into it. Here's our roadmap for this elevator ride through the parliamentary structure. First, the question of sovereignty. Second, the anatomy of the two houses. Third, the presiding officers. Fourth, balancing the power. Fifth, sessions and procedures. And finally, number 6, parliamentary privileges. All right, section 1, the question of sovereignty. So we're kicking things off by challenging a pretty massive assumption right out of the gate. Is the Indian Parliament an absolutely sovereign body? It's super easy to assume that a country's top legislative institution has supreme, unchecked power to just do whatever it wants. But take a second to ponder that. Does India's parliament actually have that kind of absolute limitless authority? Well, if we look at the British system for comparison, a huge difference jumps out. The British parliament, it enjoys absolute sovereignty. It can literally make laws on practically any subject, and those laws cannot be challenged. But the Indian parliament, not absolutely sovereign. It is entirely subject to the Constitution. If a law violates the basic structure of the Constitution, or, say, wasn't made following the right procedures, the Supreme Court of India can step right in and declare that law totally null and void. So, while Parliament is incredibly powerful, make no mistake, the Constitution is the ultimate boss here. Moving on to Section 2, Anatomy of the Two Houses. Now that we know the boundaries of its power, let's look at the actual parts of this machine. Under Article 79 of the Constitution, Parliament is actually made up of 3 distinct parts. Number 1, the President. Number 2, the Council of States, which we all know as the Rajya Sabha. And number 3, the House of the People, or the Lok Sabha. Now, it might actually surprise you to see the President listed as a part of Parliament, right? Because they don't sit in either chamber, but they're considered an absolutely integral part because of their legislative functions. Most importantly, no bill can become a law without their final signature. Now, when we compare these two massive legislative engines, we see a really sharp contrast. The Rajya Sabha is this permanent federal chamber representing the states. Its members need to be at least 30 years old, they serve long 6-year terms, and here's the kicker, 1/3 of them retire every 2 years. On the flip side, we have the Lok Sabha, the popular house. It has a lower age limit of 25, a standard 5-year term, and its elections are based directly on universal adult suffrage, thanks to Article 326. What's really fascinating here is the sheer scale of representation. The maximum strength of the Rajya Sabha is 250, while the Lok Sabha can hold up to 550 members. And I really want to highlight a super interesting detail about those Rajya Sabha numbers. Out of those 250 members, 12 are actually nominated directly by the president. And these aren't your typical politicians. They're chosen specifically for their deep expertise and practical experience in fields like science, art, literature, and social service. Pretty cool, right? And the makeup of these houses definitely isn't frozen in time. While the Constitution does provide specific reservations, like the ones for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes under Article 330, some very recent amendments have actively reshaped the modern Lok Sabha. For instance, the 104th Amendment Act in 2020 officially repealed the provision that allowed for the nomination of 2 Anglo-Indian members. And even more recently, the 106th Amendment Act was an absolute landmark change, actively providing reservation of seats for women in the Lok Sabha. Okay, let's jump into Section 3, the presiding officers. So, who actually runs these incredibly busy chambers day to day? Well, for the Rajya Sabha, the Vice President of India serves as the ex officio chairman. That basically means they hold the position automatically, simply by virtue of being the vice president. The Lok Sabha, on the other hand, is guided by a speaker, who is proactively chosen from amongst its own members by a simple majority vote. And the crucial takeaway here is that the Speaker of the Lok Sabha is a figure with immense, concentrated power. They play this vital dual role. First, they're the presiding officer maintaining order on the floor, and second, they are the administrative head of the Lok Sabha Secretariat. Plus, the Speaker enjoys cabinet status and has some remarkable special powers. For example, they alone certify whether a bill is a money bill. They supervise all parliamentary committees, and they preside over joint sittings of both houses. And uniquely, they possess what's called a casting vote. This isn't just a regular vote, it's the ultimate tiebreaker, used strictly to end a deadlock on laws that affect the whole nation. But imagine a brand newly elected Lok Sabha, Before they can even elect a permanent speaker, who runs the show? Well, this brings us to the really interesting convention of the pro tem speaker. This is usually the senior-most member of the newly elected House, appointed by the president. Their primary temporary duties are to administer oaths to all the new members and to securely conduct the actual election for the permanent speaker. And once that's done, their role is completely finished. All right, moving right along to Section 4, Balancing the Power. Now, what's really fascinating here is how the Constitution creates this deliberate asymmetry between the two houses. They serve different purposes. The Rajya Sabha is granted very specific exclusive powers that cement its role as the protector of state interests. These include initiating the removal of the vice president, authorizing Parliament to make laws on state subjects under Article 249, and having the exclusive authority to create new All India services under Article 312. Keep in mind, though, using those last two powers requires a really heavy 2/3 majority of members present and voting. But don't worry, the Lok Sabha has its own mighty domain. Only the Lok Sabha can introduce money and financial bills. Only the Lok Sabha can pass no confidence or censure motions, which, by the way, directly determine whether the current government survives or completely falls apart. And it has the special power to pass a resolution to discontinue a national emergency. Because the Lok Sabha holds this ultimate absolute power over your tax money and the survival of the executive government, critics sometimes actually refer to the Rajya Sabha as just a secondary chamber. Let's resolve that tension, though, because despite those special individual domains, both houses hold perfectly equal footing on critical constitutional matters. Think about the passage of ordinary bills, the election and impeachment of the president, the removal of Supreme Court judges and the Chief Election Commissioner, and the ratification of all national and financial emergencies. All of these monumental things demand completely equal power and participation from both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. Okay, Section 5, Sessions and Procedures. So how does this giant machine operate on a day-to-day basis? Well, before anything can happen on any given day, you need a quorum. Make sure you grasp this one. A quorum is the absolute minimum number of members required to hold a legal sitting, and it is strictly fixed at 1/10 of the total membership of the House. Simply put, without this vital 1/10 fraction physically present, the parliamentary engines legally cannot start. And when do they actually meet? The parliamentary year is mapped out chronologically into 3 convention-based sessions. First up is a super crucial budget session from February to April. Next, we have the monsoon session from July to August. And finally, the winter session, which runs from mid-November to mid-December. Now, while the Constitution doesn't actually mandate these exact names, Article 85 does explicitly rule that the gap between 2 sessions of Parliament absolutely cannot exceed 6 months. And finally, Section 6, Parliamentary Privileges. Let's examine the protective casing built around our MPs. This is what allows them to do their jobs effectively and, most importantly, without fear. We can break down Article 105 into individual and collective privileges. Individually, MPs enjoy immense freedom of speech in Parliament. They are literally immune from any court action regarding what they say or how they vote in there. Collectively, the House as a whole can punish individuals for contempt and formally prohibit the publication of its proceedings. But there are definitely guardrails. For example, an MP still cannot discuss the conduct of a Supreme Court or High Court judge on the floor unless an active removal motion is officially being discussed. Another very specific individual protection is freedom from arrest. An MP cannot be arrested in a civil case 40 days before, during, or 40 days after a session. Furthermore, an MP can never be arrested from within the premises of the Parliament without permission, and the presiding officer must be immediately informed of any detention. But I have to add a really surprising fact here. While they are completely protected from civil arrest, MPs can still absolutely be arrested for criminal offenses, under preventative detention laws, or for contempt of court, even during active sessions. Just, not inside the building itself. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today, and to wrap things up, I want to leave you with a rather provocative examination question to ponder. The privileges and immunities enjoyed by the MPs are much more than what has been mentioned in the Constitution. Analyze this statement. Think about that for a moment. I really encourage you to reflect on the unwritten conventions and historical precedents that govern this supreme legislative body. It adds such a fascinating layer to everything we've just unpacked. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer of the Indian Parliament. Keep learning, and I'll see you on the next one.